this next session, I'm going to introduce you to, Leila's going to do it. And I just want to thank God for her, for a daughter-in-law that loves the Lord. She raising four of my grandchildren, keeping them from West raising them, that makes it. But Leila loves the Lord. She's a good teacher. She does our Sunday night Bible study, and we really enjoy. I look forward to it. I always enjoy it. I get called out on it sometimes when I'm a granddaughter. One time I lost my book and I didn't do it all week, and she found my book. So she's like, "So Gigi, how did you do with your lesson?" So anyway, but I love Leila, and that she's in her life, but she is talented. She's really good at digging into the Word of God, and so I can't wait to hear about her stories. But I know part of her stories. So anyway, but here we have Leila coming. Let's pray first too before she comes up. Lord, I thank you for this day that you've given us. I thank you for this time and this fellowship, Lord. Thank you so much for being with us, Lord, today. And I pray that you just comfort us, Lord, and show us, even if, Lord, the things that you put in our lives or that we couldn't have, that would cause on our own, Lord, that even though those issues happen, Lord, that you are there. I thank you for the vision for this meeting, Lord, and I thank you for all you do. I thank you for your love and your care. In Jesus' name, amen.
Get this set up here. Apparently, I'm the only person that needs water to talk. There's no place to put water. Okay. Hey, babe, how did you have this set up? Just here? I was going to hold my mic, and then I started thinking, I talk a lot with my hands. A lot with my hands. I just had a bad feeling that it would be like this the whole time, and I kind of want to hold on to it for safety reasons, like security blanket. Okay, hold on. Okay, can y'all hear me? Alright, anyways, I want to hold on to it for security reasons, but I just moved it. Did my picture just fall?
No, you're gonna put your mirror.
No,
Okay.
but you're close.
I'm done. And you see me again. Okay. I'm already nervous. I'm about to break my picture and then I'm gonna cry in front of y'all, and I don't cry, so that would be great for everybody. Alright, so y'all don't be freaked out by my folders or by my many pieces of paper. Wes printed this out for me, and he walks in the room and he goes, "You wrote a book." And I was like, I don't say all the words on the paper. So, I am the person that in order to get my words out, I have to think everything that's in my mind has to come out. And somewhere in that messed up, jumbled up mess, there's going to be something that I can use. And be really honest with you, which I feel like is a really good way to start out with this conversation since I've lied to you a couple times already today. I really struggled for some reason with sitting down and getting my thoughts out today. God actually gave me this outline that I have for today, piece by piece, months ago. Like, I knew the thought and knew where I wanted to go. I knew the pieces. I had points, guys. Felt very professional. And then it just set. It sat there. So let me explain something really quick about myself. When I'm in the car, there's always music playing. Always. If not, that means I'm probably in a really, really bad mood. But when it's quiet and it's just the music playing, my mind travels, right? And so it starts with the words I'm hearing in the song. And then somehow, somewhere, some way, I end up in this other world of thought, right? I feel like that's pretty normal. I like to think so. And then I blurt out the thoughts, forgetting that everybody else in the car has been sleeping and not actually hearing what's going on in my head. So the skeleton of my thoughts really came from the many, many road trips we took this year. Because I was listening to music and I drive. It saves our marriage. I highly recommend it. I'm a very nervous passenger. My husband is not a horrible driver. I'm just a nervous passenger. And so I drive, everybody sleeps. And I listen to whatever I want to listen to. And so then my mind would travel and God would give me a thought, and then I would wake Wes up. He loves me so so much. And I would say, even if, and then I would get this thought. He would wake up and he'd be like, wait, what are we talking about? And then I would tell him my point and then I would explain it to him. And first I have to say, Wes is a very encouraging person. If women were preachers, he would make a really good preacher husband. But encouragement or words of affirmation are not my strong suit. I'm very bad at giving them, but Wes is very good at encouragement. He has that gift of encouragement. And so I'd wake him up, we talk it through, and always at the end, he'd be like, that's good stuff. That's good stuff, babe. So I'm like, oh, good. And then I would add it to my little note section of my phone, and there it stayed for months. And I'm talking probably since before July. These thoughts have been flowing through my mind, right? You should see all the notes in my phone. Every time I have it goes in my phone. It's kind of like Miss Betty, you're talking about you have notes everywhere, 150 notebooks. That's my notes section in my phone.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I'm just like, I know I wrote it down somewhere. Or I'll forget I even wrote it down. It's great. So, also, I'm probably going to look down on my notes a lot because when I'm nervous, I've read through them multiple times, but, it helps me. So I started typing, right? Because got to get my words out. I got to start doing something, either writing or typing. And typing was faster. So I started typing things out. And first I said, well, let me just start with something easy. What is my burden for, the ladies of our church? What's my vision? What would I like to see? Sometimes I forget there's God out there, sorry. But, what am I burdened for the ladies of our church? So I started typing that out, which then led me to typing about what I would call was a rough draft of an autobiography on my life. Y'all will be very happy to know I cut all of that out. So then I pulled out my devotional journal, and that's where I was telling you everything that comes to mind during my devotions. That's not really in my devotions. I write it down. And I just started reading to it, and I threw it, and I started asking myself, why was it this theme, right? When I tell you I have 30 million themes floating around in my mind all the time, the theme I have been talking about for how many years, Wesley? Probably since North Carolina. I really want to do a theme of everyone is welcome at the table. It's about the woman at the well, and that's not the theme we got to go with, God. That's what I've been wanting to do for a while. I will one day do that theme, but I have lots of themes, so I'm like, why this theme? And it's kind of simple, really. One thing we all have in common, every single person, life is hard, right? We all have been let down by someone or something. We've all been hurt. We've all felt alone, even in a room full of people. The worst feeling when you're in a room full of people and you just feel alone. We all have been in those moments where we believe that God could do it, but then we also have that thought, what if he doesn't? So what if he doesn't? Because sometimes he doesn't, right? So we're going to start in Daniel chapter 3, which is, Jamie hit on that, and I was like, she's taking my lesson, and I don't know what to do, but she hit on different topics. It worked out. We're going to focus on the story in Daniel chapter 3. That's really, really familiar to us, mainly because we just heard it. But I have learned, if I have learned anything in my spiritual growth, because it's a walk, it's a journey, you're never there. I heard a preacher say recently, if a preacher cannot learn or is unwilling to learn, he has become ineffective. And I believe that's all of us. If we all become unwilling to learn, we are ineffective. But what I've learned as I have grown up, I grew up in church. All these stories are very familiar, but it's that the stories in the Bible have become so familiar, we miss really important themes because of their familiarity of them. So this story takes place when the children of Israel were captive in Babylon, right? So prior to this particular story, the Bible introduces us to a handful of young men, right? We're very well known. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, right? They took a stand. They were not princesses, but princes. They were male. Prince, there's multiple of them, plural. And they were brought into the king's court because they were educated. They were also probably very well groomed. So they were brought into the king's court. And even though they were captives, they weren't from that country, they were still brought in to be used. So Well, they took a stand immediately when they got there. And the results were great, right? They took a stand. And they were known for taking a stand, and so far it served them well. But how many of us can testify that you've taken a stand before and it seemed to go really well, right? You took that stand, the results are great. You didn't really have much pushback. There was no mocking, right? You were feeling pretty good and confident. Took the stand, it went really well. But then your story changes. The scenery changes around you, or the culture changes. Got a lot of culture we learned today in our game. There's a lot of cultural changes just in age, right? And slowly, bit by bit, you find yourself not as confident in your stance anymore, right? You're not as confident to publicly take that stand that you took in the past. Maybe fear has crept in, or doubt has started knocking at your door, and circumstances happen, and that stand doesn't seem so important anymore. So this story we're going to focus on in Daniel chapter 3 comes right after another interesting story, which so happens to be Daniel chapter 2. Imagine that. We find the king in Daniel chapter 2, he had an extremely troubling dream. So back then, there was a lot of dream interpretations, right? So his dream was so troubling, he could not go back to sleep. So he woke everybody up. Sounds about right for a male. Can't sleep, everybody's awake. He woke everybody up, and he calls for all the wise men, all the astrologers, all the magicians, all the people to explain this dream, and they couldn't. But not only could they not explain the dream or tell him the dream, they told this king only a real God could know your dream. And we're not it. We're not smart enough. So the king, like a king would do, goes out to the wise men, and he puts a decree out and says he wants all the wise men slain. And this is where Daniel and his companions come in. Because in the verse, in Daniel chapter 2, it says, a decree went out that all the wise men should be slain, and they sought Daniel and his companions, or his fellow men, to be slain. So Daniel hears this, how the king had a troubling dream, and that no one could tell the king of it, and now everyone has to pay the price, which is death. And he said, not today, Satan. He said, nope. And he immediately requests the king with an audience with the king. But before Daniel goes to meet the king, he finds his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Those were Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. And he says, I need you to go to the God of heaven and pray for mercy for me. And he said, I need you to pray like you've never prayed before. So Daniel goes to the king and he tells him his dream. He doesn't even interpret the dream. He tells the king, this is what you dreamed. And then he interprets what he dreamed, the dream to him. And oddly enough, King Nebuchadnezzar, he dreamed about an idol. It was a pretty terrifying idol, and the outcome of this dream was not a good dream, or was not a good outcome. It was actually a pretty intense outcome. And the king responds to Daniel in verse 47 of chapter 2, and he says, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. So in this moment right here, the king believed. Daniel's God, he believed, was a God of all gods, little g. All gods, little g, because they had a lot of little g gods, right? So then in verse 48, it says, then the king made Daniel a great man, and he gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. And then he says in the next verse, then Daniel requested the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. So remember his friends that he prayed for, he had prayed for him earlier. They are now in a position of authority over the provinces of Babylon. So that's them. That's their Chaldean names. Is it Chaldean, Wesley? Chaldean names. Knew you would know. So here we are, finally, at chapter 3, and we're going to hear kind of the craziest story. And the reason I told y'all that backstory is because of this reason. It's because you remember that terrifying dream the king had, right? In the last chapter, he was terrified. Terrified. He couldn't sleep of this idol that was in his, this image that was in his dream. Well, let's look at verse 1 of chapter 3, and it says, Nebuchadnezzar, the same king, Nebuchadnezzar the king, made an image of gold. So this wasn't just any idol. This idol was huge. It was 90 feet tall and it was made of pure gold. But do you remember what was so terrifying in the king's dream? was an idol. It was an image. Literally. Chapter 2 goes into chapter 3. I'm terrified of an image, so then he creates an image, which is where our first point comes in. Our first point is, even if, so number one, even if they are foolish, even if everyone around me seems to have lost their minds, even if they do things that go against what I believe, what I've been taught, or what is morally wrong, even if they are foolish, how do I respond? So the scripture doesn't really indicate exactly when this image was recreated. We know chapter 3 obviously follows chapter 2, but we don't know the length of time in between those two chapters. But I was trying to find that out. Some commentators believe that this idol was built soon after the interpretation of the dream, but others think it may have been actually up to 20 years later that it was built. Regardless, it terrified him. Some dreams you just don't forget. But we see how foolish this king acts. He's kind of arrogant, right? He seems to be a little arrogant. Though the king recognized the power of Daniel's gods just a few verses back, it seems he did not abandon his belief in other deities. Nor does it seem that he restrained his pride. Pride is a very dangerous thing. And it makes us do some foolish things. Pride, I looked it up, it's mentioned 58 times in the Bible. The Bible warns us multiple times of how pride can bring you down, how pride can ruin your life. Actually, in Proverbs 6, verses 16 and 17, the verses literally say, "These 6 things that the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him." What's that first one mentioned? It's a proud look. The first one mentioned, pride. The Lord hates pride. Pride destroys a lot of things. But what happens when someone else's pride destroys your life? What happens when their pride starts causing things in your world to turn upside down? How do you respond then? So I kind of want our focus to shift a little bit. A different book of the Bible. We're going to talk about a foolish man that we find in the Bible. As a matter of fact, this man's name actually literally means fool. And I was reading this. I'm trying to imagine the scenario of what the parents were thinking when they named him that. I'm literally trying to think in my head, like, "Hey, babe, do you think we should name this baby? Great name, babe. It's called Bull." I think I would have used my beta power on that one. Like, absolutely not. 1 Samuel 25:3 says, "Now the name of the man was Nabal," Mr. Foolish here, right? "And the name of his wife was Abigail." And listen to what it says about Mr. Foolish's wife, right? It says she was a woman of good understanding and of a beautiful countenance. So Abigail was not only beautiful, but she was intelligent, she was sensible, she was discerning. But it says the man was churlish and evil in his doings. So he was harsh. He behaved badly. He was a horrible human being. Can you imagine being married to this Mr. Wonderful? Like, opposites attract. I feel like this is an opposites attract story. So listen to how he's described in verse 17 of 1 Samuel 25 by one of his men, one of the young men that worked for him. He says, "He is such a son of Belial." So this phrase, son of Belial, describes a wicked, worthless person. He's telling Abigail, the wife of Mr. Foolish here, "Your husband is such a worthless man that no man can speak to him." He's basically saying he's so ill-tempered that no one wants to talk to him. No man can reason with him. How many of us know someone like this? You don't raise your hand, especially this thing. But we know people like this, right? They're so full of themselves, right? So full of pride, they think they know everything, and that their answer is always right. And no one can tell them any different. That's exhausting. Oh, those people annoy me. Oh, I can't handle it. So, glad I was married to him. So what happens if you find yourself living with someone like this, though? What happens when your spouse or your close friends makes foolish mistake after foolish mistake, and you are feeling the effects of those foolish mistakes? What would it look like to be married to a lying, hard-hearted, ill-natured man? And some of you may know exactly what that's like, right? And you can probably attest to that, right? You can attest to the fact that Abigail was not the happily ever after she probably thought she was going to have or dreamed of as a little girl. But the Bible describes her as a woman of good understanding and of a beautiful countenance. So the meaning of countenance here is referring to the look of the expression on her face, right? Thursday night, Becky's going to remember this story. Thursday night, Becky and I were in the fellowship hall putting together the tables and such. And we were just trying different things to see what would look good, what with what we had. We're working within our constraints. And Becky said, look at this and tell me what you think. And she goes, now, I don't want you to say it looks good. She goes, I want you to be honest with me. Don't just say it looks good because you don't want to hurt my feelings. And I looked at her, I said, Becky, I won't have to tell you because my face will tell you. And she's like, I forgot who I was dealing with. Wes tells me time and time again, he goes, babe, your face has subtitles. And sometimes I can catch myself before and I can watch that. But if I'm taken off guard and I don't catch it in time, my face, my countenance has subtitles. But Abigail wasn't just beautiful on the outside. That's not what the Bible's saying. She was beautiful from the inside as well. Her countenance, her facial expressions were beautiful. She had been living with what I would call an extremely narcissistic man who by his own name is known for being a fool. Yet the Bible makes sure to mention that her countenance, her facial expression was still beautiful. She didn't become hard. It's hard to be around bitter people and not become bitter. It's hard to be around people that are so mean and not just, it tears you down, right? You may not become bitter, but when you feel beat down, you feel like you're worthless, like you're the worst person around because you've been told that. People act like you are. But it says that her facial expression was still beautiful. So then I had to think, well, what about me? Does my facial expressions reflect a quiet, calm, peaceful beauty from deep within, even when I may be surrounded by churlish people or circumstances? Do I exude that peace from deep within when nothing else without is okay? That's hard. That's hard. I'm not even going to say it's easy. I can speak it. It sounds easy, but it's not hard. John 16:33 tells us that Jesus speaking here, he tells us where the peace comes from. He says, these things have I spoken unto you, that in me you might have peace. In me you might have peace. And if we are saved, then he is in us. So we have that peace in us. The peace that we need to equip ourselves to handle the Nabals in our life. Proverbs 26:4 says, answer not a fool according to his folly, lest thou also be like unto him. This basically is saying, don't talk to a fool or don't respond to a fool in the way they respond to you. It's really unwise to imitate a foolish person's attitude, mannerisms, or approach. We even see that how Jesus responds. Jesus didn't respond to petty insults with insults, because Jesus got insulted a lot with petty things. He didn't respond to lies with lies. When his critics were unfair or unkind, he was firm. Sometimes he was forceful, but he didn't use the same foolish tactics as those who attacked him. So even if they were foolish, still I can trust, still I can have the peace that can only be found with him. And even if others can still see Jesus in my countenance. So let's go back to Daniel chapter 3. And for the sake of time, we'll just talk about what's going on. The king built this huge image, right? This idol, 90 feet tall. And he has commanded that every people, so every nation, every tongue, not just his kinfolk, not just his home folk, we're talking everybody, all those who were also in his captivity, when the music starts playing, and then it was a ton of instruments. So you're talking about a full-blown orchestra here. When the music starts playing, everyone is to fall down and worship this golden image. And if you do not bow down and worship, you will immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. So they were a group of Chaldeans. They were culturally known for astrology, and they have decided to go to the king with some malicious accusations, right? Remember, not long ago, they were in the list of wise men that the king decreed to kill for not telling his dream. So they come to the king and they said, you made this decree. And it says, but there are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. And then they named them by name. And they refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the golden image you set up. But what I want us to notice real quick, in verse 8 it says, they accuse the Jews. The Chaldeans accuse the Jews. But then in verse 11 it says, there are a certain Jew. And they named how many? They named 3. So first they were accusing this entire nation, Jewish nation, of not bowing down. But just 3 verses later, it really boils down to only 3. So then I looked up to see, well, how many Jewish people would have there been in this captivity? So during the time of captivity in Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar, there was an estimation of between 14,000 to 18,000 Jews that were in captivity. 14 to 18,000 Jews, but the Chaldeans only found 3 who were not bowing down. Where were all the other Jews? Why were they not taking a stand? Where was Daniel? I'm not speaking bad against Daniel. We know Daniel takes his own stand later, but where was Daniel? Where, out of all the thousands of Jews, there were 3. So here we are at our second evening. And I'm proud of myself. I have alliterations going. My dad would be so proud of me. We had even if they are foolish. Our second one is even if they flee. What happens when you find yourself alone? When you're going through the hardest season of your life and it just seems like everyone just disappeared. What I have found in my journey is that sometimes my pain is too complicated for others to touch. You're going through something so difficult and there are no answers and no one knows how to respond, so they don't. It was too complicated, so people stayed out of it. They were afraid to misplace their compassion in case what had happened maybe was my fault. Sometimes my pain was received with warmth, but from a distance. So back in March of 2014, I found myself very much pregnant with my 3rd child. A pregnancy, in truth, I didn't even want. And in the month of March, while I was very pregnant, I found my world crumbling around me. I was pregnant and alone. That's a TLC show name right there. I'm pregnant and alone. And I can picture it today as clearly as it was 11 years ago. And I lost a lot of memories in my surgeries, but for some reason, this one memory I can't seem to lose. I was sitting in my living room in our little house in Oak Grove, Kentucky, at the corner of my couch, and I was holding my phone and my world had just felt like it had crashed around me. And I had just received that text that said, I can't do marriage anymore. How do you respond to that? How do you, at close to 9 months pregnant, respond to that? Everything I had known, everything I thought I knew came crashing around me and I felt so alone. And what I found in my pain was that people didn't know what to do with me. They didn't know how to respond to me. Church people. People that I thought would pour the most in me seemed scared to touch my pain. Part of it was I really wasn't ready to tell my story. So I was blamed a little bit. Surely it was my fault, right? Even if I wasn't blamed though, where would they categorize me now? Wes and I have been extremely active in our church. We were on stage quite a bit. We worked with the youth. We led the youth choir. Wes had multiple ministries going in the church. So many ministries that he actually had his own office in the church. How do they handle me? Where do I fit in? It became complicated, right? So they fled. They avoided. They kept their distance, and I felt abandoned. So some felt pity and sadness, but from a distance. Some reached out, but only because they wanted the gossip. What happens when they scatter? What happens when it seems like no one will stand with you? This is when you really find out who your friends are. I had one person who refused to let me fight the battle on my own. Well, that's a lie. Sorry, my pastor and his wife were by my side in that fight as well. So I had 3. I had 3 people who refused to let me hide, who refused to leave me alone. But 3 out of how many? Sometimes even 3 feels lonely. Even with 3, you feel the abandonment of all my friends. In the darkest, loneliest moments, that is where you find out who your God is. Though through the shaking of your faith, that is where you rebuild your faith. So pain can change people though, right? Can make them trust less, overthink more, and shut people out. So it's easier for me to shut people out so I didn't feel the pain of being rejected or feel like I had the plague. I know I had people I could have fallen back on, family, 100% family. I would have been there for me, and they were when I allowed them to be. It's hard to help someone that doesn't tell you when they need help. And when your family's so far away, they can't see what you need. But it was in that moment where I was feeling utter loneliness and utter defeat. And it was during that time that I couldn't even say to myself, just make it through today, because today seemed too much. So I lived in 5-minute increments. I know it sounds silly, but I literally would tell myself, just make it through the next 5 minutes. And that's how I survived. But it was in that pain that I learned so much. I had what felt like everything I knew stripped from me. My title as a wife was gone. My connection to the Army was gone, which was such a huge part of my life. My connection to the Special Forces community, which was more than family, was gone. My best friend was gone. And what felt like my future was gone. Everything that defined me, that I knew defined me, or I thought defined me, was gone. And that was when I was forced to realize that I had placed my identity in all the wrong things. And suddenly my identity was no longer my identity. But in this really ugly pain, something beautiful happened. Even though I was going through what was, and what I still see as the hardest season of my life, I found God. I'm not saying I was unsaved up until that point. I had believed, I trusted him, I had confessed with my mouth, right? But I truly found him because I finally searched for him. I remember being desperate for God because the pain was so intense and I knew I needed him and couldn't survive this new life I found myself in without him, but I didn't know how to truly find him. I remember looking at my bookshelf. I remember this. My bed was here and my bookshelf was right there. I remember looking at my bookshelf and the many devotionals I have all over the years. I had a short stint where I worked at Lifeway. I had a lot of devotionals, and they sit on my bookshelf, and I bought them, and I never looked at. I saw them, but they were just there. They were my collection. But one by one, day by day, morning by morning, I went through each and every one of those devotionals, because when I didn't know how to study God for myself, I let someone else do that part, and I gleaned from what they had learned. And then I began to realize I had been placing my identity in all the wrong things, in all the wrong places, in all the wrong people, and I began to understand what it meant when people talked about who you are in Christ. I used to get so mad when people would say, you just gotta know who you are in Christ. Okay, tell me how to do that. Like, you can't just assume we all know what you mean. But he knew my frame. He knew my state of mind. He knew my heart, and he knew my pain. And God didn't just know it, he felt it. He understood it, and he wanted to carry it for me. So when most people didn't know what to do with me or how to handle me, how to answer me, he did. But more importantly, he wanted to. So we talked about, even if they are foolish, he's my peace. Even when others flee, I find myself all alone, he is with me. Number 3, I want us to consider this, even if, this one's hard, even if they flourish, even if those who hurt me intentionally, and I'm over here shattered, right, trying to pick up the pieces and hold it together, even if they seem to be getting all the blessings and good things added to them, what then? We don't need to read it again, or I don't need to recount it really again, but I do want us to go back to the part where the Chaldeans went to the king and pointed out the 3 men. What did they have to profit from that? These 3 guys weren't insulting them. They weren't. The king didn't even know that they weren't bowing down. He was unaware that these 3 people weren't bowing down. So why? They were intentional, malicious about bringing it up to the king. So let's look from their viewpoint, right? Where is this coming from? These 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they weren't from Babylon. Yet the king had them in high places of position. They had the king's ear, right? They were important. King listened to them, and they weren't just foreigners. Right? It wasn't just the king was listening to foreigners. They were captives. They were prisoners, right? They didn't belong there. They weren't there of their own free will. They had been taken. If the Chaldeans could get rid of these 3, then they could have the king's ear again. Remember, they were about to be killed. Just the last chapter. If they could get rid of them, make them look good, or make them look bad, then the Chaldeans can look good. Pointing out someone else is wrong. No one in the Bible probably understood, even if they flourish, still I will not falter, more than Joseph. Joseph is character, y'all. Once you start studying his life, you can find so many things relatable. And sometimes I think we forget he's a person, not just a story. We forget that about a lot of people in the Bible because we hear these stories, but he was a person. He knew what it was like to do all the right things and get no reward for it. He knew what it was like to say no to temptation and still be punished for it, while the one who accused him and was tempting him, walked free. In Genesis 39, it says, and it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house, so he was, oh my gosh, Leslie, who was he? He was Potiphar, Potiphar. Woo. In his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in his field. Joseph did all the work. Potiphar reaped all the reward. Verse 22, and the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was a doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, that which Joseph did, the Lord made it prosper. So what do we do when it seems like we're doing all the right things, all the God things, yet everyone else seems to be reaping the benefits but us? Those weren't Christians reaping his benefits. Those were Egyptians. He was their slave. We do what Joseph did. We just keep doing. Even when it's hard, we do. Even when our family turns on us, we do. Even when we are tempted day after day, we keep saying no. Even when we say no to temptation, it seems like life gets worse, and we ask ourselves, what's the point of fighting anymore? We keep fighting. Even if we end up in what feels like a prison, we do. But when it's time for God to pour out his blessing on you, we need to make sure we have been doing what we were supposed to, so that way we are in the place God's blessings begin to flow out. Joseph endured years of all that I just said. His brothers sold him into slavery. He stayed faithful. His owner's wife seduced him day after day. He stayed faithful. He was falsely accused. He stayed faithful. He was thrown into a prison and forgotten. He stayed faithful. But God, when it was time for God to pour out his blessing, it states in the Bible that Pharaoh and his men, they ran to get Joseph out of prison. It was a fast move. They ran to get him out of prison. If you need encouragement today to stay faithful and to not stop, that's your encouragement. God's time becomes quick time. Joseph was a slave for years. And then when God was ready to deliver him, it was quick. It was just like that. He literally immediately went from a prisoner in the Pharaoh's jail to second in command in all of Egypt in one day. Your story of your life may not look like God's story of your life, but God's story is always the best story. I want us to look at something real quick, though, in chapter 37 of Genesis. After his brothers stripped Joseph of his robe and threw him in a pit, verse 25 says, and they sat down to eat. They had literally just assaulted their brother. They tossed him in a pit, had plans to kill him. And remember, Joseph's only 16 or 17 at this time. He's not very old. They did all of this, and then they sat down and ate. In Esther chapter 3, we see where a decree was made to kill all the Jews because one man felt insulted by one man. Letters were sent out among all the provinces with instructions to destroy, to kill and to annihilate all the Jews because of one man. Young and old, women and children, all to be destroyed. And look at what the king and Haman did in verse 15. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. Chaos was ensuing. Confusion was in the city and among the provinces, and the people that caused it having a drink. Let me ask you a question real quick. Has someone ever picnicked by your pit before? Sometimes the people who hurt us the most do just the same thing. Perhaps they look at you in confusion as they cannot for the life of them understand what's wrong with you, right? Some of us have been used and abused by such just a person, and they honestly don't even see what's wrong. And if they do, they don't see that it's a big deal. And it's hard. We get hurt. We get mad. If we're not careful, we let that mad turn to bitterness, right? It's incredibly hard to see the people who hurt you go on with their life. They have a picnic at the edge of your pit, or cocktails during the chaos of your life. And as your life has been shattered into a million pieces. I remember many days when it was just me doing the single mom life. Had 2 babies, 16 months apart. Don't recommend. And they were both needing my attention. And I was trying so hard not to push my oldest son aside because he was easy. He could do it on his own. I remember the days when I felt like I was barely treading water, and I felt more like I was drowning than surviving. And I would look at Wes. I wouldn't look at him because he was in a different state. I would imagine Wes having the time of his life. No worries, no relying on him, no one relying on him, not having to fight to keep food on the table, not having to work a full-time job and feeling like you barely see your kids, and then when you did, you didn't have the energy to do much but just sit there because you're emotionally exhausted, physically and mentally exhausted. I know what it's like to feel like I'm bearing the weight of someone else's wrong while they get to do whatever they want to do. I didn't want to live without my kids. That's not what I'm trying to say. I didn't want to be alone. I just wanted to know that I wasn't the only one in pain. But he was living his own kind of pain. I know now. Just know that even if we don't see it, even if it seems like that person is flourishing, they probably are living in the torment of their own decisions, trying to run and hide from it, but not being able to run far enough or hide deep enough. But what do? That's when you fall on your truths that you know about God. You go back to the Word. He's faithful. He's just. He's fair. He's good. Joseph stayed faithful, and in God's time, he brought him out and he helped him save a country. But more importantly, he saved his family. Esther stayed faithful and had the courage to go in unto the king, and she saved her life and the life of her people, and more importantly, her family. God has seen everything that has happened to you. And just as he took care of Joseph and his family and Esther and her people, he can take care of you. You just got to rest in the sweet fact. And in the arms of the sweet Savior, he will never hurt you. So we've now come to the end of my story. I'm sure y'all are thankful for that. And really, this is the entire crux of the story. It's been building this entire time, and it's come to one thing. Even if it all falls apart. Nebuchadnezzar, at this point in the story, is furious. He is in this furious rage, and he commands the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be brought before him. And when they come before him, he says, "Is this true? Is it true that you refuse to worship the golden image that I have set up?" And then he says, "Now, if you're ready." When I read this, y'all have to know how my mind works. When I read this, it was like I thought about when your child is acting a fool. And you set them down and remind them that they're a human, and this is how humans are supposed to act. You have this deep heart-to-heart with them, and then you say, "Now, if you're ready to behave, we'll go right back out." That makes me think of that. He goes, the king says, "Now, if you're ready, we're going to play the music again. And when you hear it, you will bow down." He's telling them at this point, "I'm giving you one chance. I'm giving you one more chance." And what do? This is the same king that you have to remember who not long ago declared that their God was the God of all gods. And he says, "And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" So, verse 17, Shadrach, Meshach, I don't know which one was a spokesperson here in this group. You know, there's always that one spokesperson of your entire little group. That's Wes in our family. And I don't know who was a spokesperson, but they were bold. They said, "If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thy hand, O king." One way or the other, either God was going to do some miraculous work and deliver them, or they were going to be delivered in death. They said, "O king, but if not, be it known unto thee, O king." In other words, we want to make this very clear to you, your majesty. They probably weren't as disrespectful as I just sounded, but they were making it clear, "But if not, we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up." I want you to get this. They said, "But if not, we know God can deliver us, but if not, we will not." We know he can, but if he chooses not to, we still won't, is what they're saying. They had the faith. They knew God could pull them through, and they made a bold stance, right? They were making the right choice, but what happened? The king became so mad at their stance, he didn't even give them the chance to bow down. I looked over that in the Bible. I've read this story so many times, and until this week, did I realize that he did not even give, I don't know where I thought that they did those trumpets and blew them again, and those guys just kept standing. The Bible does not tell us that. It literally says he became so furious. He became so mad, it says in verse 19, The form of his visage was changed. He was so mad his face became distorted with rage. Have you ever seen that when someone gets so mad their whole face changes? This gets scary. Wes has a scary mad face. Y'all think that he just has that resting really bad, what do you call it, Baptist face? He's got a very scary mad face. He's actually a very wonderful person. I probably should add that. But his face can become when he gets mad. But the form of his visage was changed. He was so mad, his face became distorted with rage. His facial expression changed towards them, the Bible said. And we know the story. He commanded the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than normal. He commanded the strongest men in his army to bind the 3 men and then throw them in the furnace. But I don't know about you, but at this point, if I were the 3 men, I might be asking a few questions here. I might be having a little heart-to-heart with God and asking him, hey, God, what went wrong? Like, at what part was he going to show up? Because essentially, they did all the right things. They refused to bow. Then they were pulled before the king and had to stand before the one who gave the command to kill people. And they made a stance. And they had to make a really big life and death stance. And they did all the right things. They said all the right words. And now they're being bound and thrown into the hottest furnace ever. No, this isn't just a story we read. They were living through this. This was their life. These were real people. They had made stances before. And God had come through for them. God showed out through their stances. And I'm sure they were extremely confident God would pull through for them. But you have to wonder, while they saw that king's countenance change, if a little seed of doubt wasn't planted in their mind. When the strongest of the king's army bound their hands, did they have that little bit of twinge of fear of, what if? You know, like, they took that stand, but it didn't seem God was taking his stand. I remember having so much faith that if I just remained faithful to Wes, if I did all the right things, if I made all the appropriate outreaches to him, if I remained softened to him, if I did all the right things, God would bless that. And Wes would realize the error of his ways, and he'd come running back to me, crawling back to me. But I remember one day, I was sitting in my work van, waiting to pick up kids from school. I worked for a martial arts studio, and we had an after-school program. And I was reading a book, and I can't even tell you the name of the book. I don't know what it looks like. I don't even know the author. But I was reading it, and this lady did all the right things in her marriage, a Christian lady. And her marriage didn't recover. And in that moment, I realized that I could do all the right things. I could follow all the right steps, and I could say all the right words. And I could believe with all my heart that God could make my marriage whole again. I could do all of that. And I could have all the faith in the world. And I could still lose it all. And I remember feeling like someone had punched me in the gut. And the pain and the sorrow and the sadness that washed over me was almost unbearable. Because it was then I realized that even if he could, sometimes he doesn't. And I vividly remember thinking, why didn't anybody warn me? Like, why don't we talk about that part? Growing up, prayers didn't get answered the way we thought they should or wanted them to. It was just us not having enough faith. And that's simply not true. I would even find myself praying all the time, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. Yet there was silence. So there's a man in the Bible we're all very familiar with, whose name is Job. Job's entire story is a series of even if he doesn't. Job lost everything, and he didn't just lose it all. He lost it all in rapid succession. It's one thing to experience loss, but when they keep coming one after another, you feel like you'll never see the light of day again. Job had one of the biggest even if moments of all. He had it all come crashing down in one day. He lost his health. He lost his wealth. He lost his children. All taken from him. His entire world was ripped from him, and he lost his health. But on the most devastating day of his life, a day where he lost it all, where do we find Job? Job 1, verse 20. Then Job arose, and he rent his mantle, and he shaved his head. He fell down on the ground, and he worshipped. Even if it all falls apart, worship. Job tells his wife later, when she tells him to curse God and die, Should we only accept good things from God and not anything bad? I'm not going to pretend that this is easy, because there are days when worship is the last thing I want to do. There are days when opening my Bible and hearing from God is the last thing I want to do. I don't need us to be spiritual right now. I need us to be honest. There are days that if I could stay in bed and pretend life wasn't happening around me, I would. Job worshipped. I've heard C.T. Townsend say this statement over and over again. If God were not to give us one more blessing, if he were not to answer one more prayer, he's already done more than enough. He's already been better to me than I deserve. Should we only accept good things from God? Even if you take it all, God, you've still been good to me. It might be helpful if we start counting the many everyday moments where God has come through for us and where things did work out for us. Made it to work today, God. Thanks. That bill got paid, God. Thanks. My body was healthy enough to do what I just did today. I woke up this morning, God. Just because these are small things that doesn't hit our radar doesn't mean they're insignificant things. On days when it feels like you barely are able to put one foot in front of the other, or if you're like me and you are having to live in 5-minute increments, you have to remind yourself that one day you will look back. And you will realize that the Lord was leading you right where you needed to be. And you may not like it. You may not feel like it. And it may be hard even to think a day ahead, much less months or years, but I promise you this. I promise you, because I know you will look back one day and you're going to be like, You're going to have your moment. And you're going to realize, so if I hadn't been in that trial, if I didn't experience that hurt, if I wasn't pushed down that path I didn't want to be on, I wouldn't have done this. That led me to this. That then led me to that. And all of a sudden, you've walked yourself from that dark moment. And where you could barely move and where you could barely see God to today, to where you see a path that God was slowly, painfully guiding you through. You may be in that dark moment. You maybe can't see that path yet, but it's there. I'm going to be honest with you, though, I struggled with today. I struggled because I had a lot of even if moments in my life. But with most of my even if moments, I had a lot of but God moments. I know when people look at me, and I have to understand that people are going to think, look at you, though. Your marriage was restored. Yeah, you went through that, but your marriage was restored. Your family wasn't just restored. You're really better off than you were before. Sure, you struggled with infertility multiple times, but you have 4 kids. Sure, you were diagnosed with cancer, but you're healthy now. I won't deny it. I won't. I refuse. I have been extremely abundantly blessed beyond what I could ask or think. And I don't know why God allowed my life to unfold the way it did. I don't know. And I do know this, though, in each of these moments in my life, when I was dealing with infertility, when I was fighting for my marriage, even when I was walking away from my marriage, when I was fighting for my life, and each and every time I was brought to a place where I had to say, God, I know you can, but even if you don't, I still trust you have a better plan for me. And that's where I think I'll leave today. You may be going through the hardest battle you've ever fought, and you are struggling to see how God can show himself faithful to you through it. Because let's be honest, no one talks about that in-between part of, I trust in God, and he answered. No one talks about that little in-between, and he answered. We're not taught to say, I trust in God, but he hasn't answered yet. I trust in God, but I'm really sad right now. Don't follow that lie that God is disappointed in us if we're sad, that our story didn't turn out the way we wanted it to. But oh, my friend, even if he doesn't, he's still very good. Faith isn't just believing that God is good no matter what. It's believing that you will be okay no matter what. When Nebuchadnezzar told them that they'd be thrown into the fire, they didn't bow. They responded, so be it. Our God will rescue us, but even if he doesn't, we still won't worship your gods. They believed they would be saved even in the fire, even in death. So we know how the story ends. They get thrown in, and the king looks in and says, didn't we throw 3 men in there? Because I see a 4th. And listen, I I had to ask Wes this last night. It said, and he is likened to the Son of God. Jesus was in there with him. Jesus wasn't born for several hundred years later. And Wes has a fancy word for that, and I don't remember what it was. But Jesus, he's laughing at me. But I had to ask him, I said, this is the Son of God. Jesus was in, walked in that fire with him. And you know, when they got pulled out of that fire, those things that had been binding their hands, they were gone. Their hair wasn't even singed. You know, their clothes, the Bible says their clothes didn't even smell like smoke. When you're near a bonfire, your hair, your clothes, your body smells like they were in a furnace. Those people that threw them in the furnace died throwing them in because it was so hot, and they did not smell like smoke. Nebuchadnezzar says, he told them, remember, he said, you need a really big God to save you from this. When I tell you that really big God showed up right when he was supposed to show up. I bet it wasn't in the time that those 3 Hebrew boys wanted him to show up, but he showed up right in the midst of the house fire. He showed up in a time, in his time and in his way. So what if he doesn't? Because sometimes he doesn't. Well then, he's good anyway. He's faithful anyway. He's just anyway. He's light anyway. Even when he doesn't, I believe he's still good because he's still God.